I think the desire to say there are no steps in this family in their own way was probably what they felt was the right thing to do. Yeah, these kids need to move forward, not stay stuck. But what they didn't realize was not being able to process about our deceased mom actually was one of the things that was keeping us stuck.
Yeah.
And it was creating some of the tension in the home itself. Yeah. Welcome to the Blended Family Coaching Show, where you'll discover how to move your stepfamily from just surviving to truly thriving.
Grab your headphones and listen in as we share practical, real-life strategies for building healthy bonds,
Understanding the kids' perspective,
romance and partnership,
parenting with great teamwork.
and yes, even co-parenting with a difficult ex.
We're Mike and Kim Anderson, and we believe with the right tools, every step couple can overcome the common challenges of stepfamily life.
Join us for authentic and sometimes comical conversations to discover how you can lead your family with confidence and create the future you really want.
Well, hey, welcome. I can't believe we're at episode 110.
Ooh.
Wow. Now, we've got a special episode. It's going to be a little bit different for you today.
Okay.
And so if this is the very first time that you've joined us on the podcast, just know it's a little different. And we probably don't want a rating or a review from you yet because we're trying something new, and who knows if it'll work well.
Hopefully you'll like it.
If it's your 110th episode that you've listened to, thanks for sticking with us. And if you haven't left a rating and review by now, man, we really need it.
Yes.
And if you're somewhere in the middle of that, we would love for you to hit subscribe or follow wherever you're listening. And also, if you could leave us that rating and review and give us some feedback on what you think of the show, we'd really appreciate it.
Now, the inspiration for this episode today came a couple of weeks ago when we were recording episode 108, which is all about the unity breakers. You might remember that.
Yep.
And we talked about this concept of sidestepping. And really what that is about is it's when we disregard the nature of step relationships in our step families. And we talked about how, sometimes step-family couples, they have the best of intention when they kind of give this message that, there are no steps in our home.
Yeah.
We're just family. But it can also create some emotional stress for kids because when the adults insist on saying we have no steps in this house, everyone's the same, it can actually push the kids further away and create disconnection within the home because they may not think of their step siblings or their step mom or dad as their biological relations.
Right.
And so it creates a lot of tension and sometimes even anger.
Yeah. And this whole thing can be really controversial in the stepfamily world because some people vehemently hold on to this idea that we need to kind of eradicate the idea that we're a stepfamily and we just need to be a family.
Like almost a first family recreation.
Right. And that comes from such a great heart, such a desire to really build love and connection and that kind of thing. But there's times where it doesn't work. And I personally have some experience with that. Because that describes a bit of the blended family that I grew up in personally.
Yeah.
And so we're taking a little bit of a different approach in the show today where Kim's going to interview me about my personal story from childhood that I don't really share a lot on the podcast. And so we just thought, well, this might be an appropriate time to share a little bit more about that. And as you listen, I just want you to keep in mind that this is one story. This isn't a bunch of stories out of research and all that. This is simply one story of one person, which is me, who experienced some of this growing up. And I'm hopeful that we can just glean some things from it.
There might be some things that apply to your dynamics as well and that really help to open your eyes to some realities. And maybe it's just interesting for you to hear more about Mike and the dynamics he grew up in. But we were really inspired to have this conversation after we talked about this concept of kind of eradicating the steps.
The sidestepping.
Yeah, and how that impacts kids. So, honey, why don't you give us the nutshell version of your childhood.
Okay, just in a nutshell. So I was born into a blended family. My mom had 2 kids in the 60s, and then she and her husband separated, and then my dad came on the scene, and they got married. They had me, and then a year later, when I was 13 months old, Mom passed away. And at that point, my grandparents, so my bio mom's parents, took all of us kids in, as well as my dad, and we lived with them until I was around 6 or 7. And then Dad remarried my stepmom. And my stepmom brought 2 kids of her own.
Oh, okay. So hold up right there. At this point, your dad has 4 stepchildren. And you as a bio child.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, he had 2 stepkids. Then he and my mom had me, and then she passed away, and then he remarried, and 2 more stepkids came on. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So, and you are roughly 7 years old.
I was about, 6 or 7 years old at the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we also want to kind of talk about the environment that you experienced living with your Nana and Papa, your grandparents.
Yeah.
You had some good stability there.
Yeah, it was definitely stable.
Okay.
Yeah, Nana and Papa were really special, and they have been my whole life. And in a lot of ways, my dad was going to school at the time, and he was working a full-time job, and so we didn't see Dad a lot. And so Nana and Papa really kind of became my parents at a young age, if I could put it that way.
Right. Yeah. So you were very bonded to them. They were a big part of your life, and then along comes this new woman into your dad's life, and they marry. And at that point, you were 7. What were your expectations when they got married, when you got this new stepmom? I mean, do you remember what might have been going on for you? I know you were only 7, but do you have a memory of that? I
mean, I was pretty little, and I can't say I have vivid memories, but I do remember a certain level of excitement, actually. Because, leading up to this, I had friends in school and people that I knew, and they had kind of I'll air quote, I know you can't see this, but air quote, a normal life.
So first family.
And, they had a mom and a dad, and, I had a dad, but no mom, and like, what is it like to have a mom, and lots of questions in my mind. And so I really wanted a mom. And so there was a piece of me that was pretty excited, actually, at first. Yeah.
And how long did that excitement last, would you say?
Unfortunately, I would say it waned pretty quickly.
Yeah.
It wasn't very long before there was quite a bit of friction in the home. And not only friction just between dad and stepmom, but also, I started noticing that my stepmom had a challenging time controlling her emotions, and that would come out in angry outbursts, and it would leak out on us kids. And that was really challenging. And specifically early on, I remember a lot of that being directed toward my sister. And that started making me wonder, whoa, like what is this going to mean for me? Like if she can treat my sister that way and dad's not really standing in the gap, what's that going to mean for me? So I started second guessing that quite a bit.
Yeah, and they kind of made that easy wrong turn we talk about all the time, where the step parent comes in and takes over discipline out of the gate before there's a connection built. So that must have been confusing too. Like, who is this person? We don't know her, and all of a sudden she was very,
the disciplinarian,
authoritarian as well.
Yeah,
so
very quickly. Yeah.
So I was also surprised to learn that she adopted you and your sister. Tell us a little bit about what that was like, because you do have some memories around that.
I remember going to the courtroom and like agreeing to that. And, I think overall there was a genuineness in wanting to create family. There was a desire to, move forward and have all of us be a family and all of that. But underneath it all, I couldn't really describe or even talk about how I was kind of feeling like I couldn't talk about it, or I couldn't argue with it. Maybe argue's the wrong word.
Or even ask questions.
I couldn't ask questions about it. I just had to go with the flow. But underneath, I was feeling pressure to agree to the adoption. And, and again, you're 7, 8 years old. It's like, I don't know what that really means.
But there was a high expectation that
Absolutely.
this was going to happen and you were going to be happy about it and go along with it and no questions asked.
Yeah.
Okay.
So here she's in this disciplinarian role. I've kind of got some fear building, and yet I'm being asked to accept her as mom, even though I know that there's something different about what's going on here. Right. And all of that was unspoken. I wasn't able to really express it, nor was there an environment where I felt safe to express it. And so I definitely struggled in that time to be able to kind of figure out, well, like how much of this stepmom do I want to accept and how much do I not want to accept? And what would have happened if mom was still around? And like, it was really a confusing time, especially I think at such a young age.
Did you kind of just know if I were to question this or ask questions that would create a problem or some tension?
Yeah, it was an unspoken tension. And it was, Dad never sat us down and said, hey, look, it's really going to hurt her feelings if we talk about your mom or anything like that. It was an unspoken, unwritten rule that everybody just kind of knew that talking about mom or talking about our history was not okay.
Taboo subject.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So even at a young age, you understood that. Yeah. So it sounds like at that point you were kind of feeling stuck as a little kid. I'm wondering what kind of thoughts you might have been having about your previous family relationships, like your grandparents and then your older brother, who's quite a bit older than you. He did not go along. He stayed back at your grandparents, right?
Yeah, well, he was 16. And again, remember, he's Dad's stepson.
Right.
And so I remember my grandparents and my dad kind of gave him a choice. He could either stay with Nana and Papa or he could come with us. And he chose to stay with Nana and Papa. And I think that was a good decision on his part. And maybe I should have said this a little bit ago, but I want to preface all this with my dad and I are getting along pretty well now. And I love my dad. And sometimes it's really vulnerable to talk about some of this history and also be able to honor Dad at the same time.
Right.
So I just want to kind of call it out up front that I honor my dad and I want to be able to be vulnerable and authentic with my story.
Yeah.
And so just kind of prefacing some of that.
Yeah. Well, you've come a long way since we met. When you and I met, I don't think you had spoken to your dad for
a number of years.
Yeah, maybe even 8 years. They didn't come to our wedding. So you've worked really hard to reconcile and have a relationship with him. Yeah.
So that was our little pause. So we're kind of back to the story. My brother stayed with Nana and Papa. And then, I got to maybe go over about once a month and spend a weekend with my grandparents. And I really enjoyed that. It kept me tied to those previous family bonds that in a way that I maybe wouldn't have had otherwise.
So that was a really positive thing for you.
Yeah, that was really positive. But, it's interesting the way you asked that question of, previous family relationships. Well, my mom is a previous family relationship. Right. And I remember, hitting 10, 11 years old and really having a lot of questions about, man, I wonder what mom was like.
Right.
I had this knowing that I'm a part of my mom. And so, maybe I could learn something about myself by learning about her.
Right.
Now, I don't think I could have articulated that at 10 or 11 years
that
old.
Natural curiosity.
But really natural, yeah. And so, it was tough, but I remember there were these little tiny moments when stepmom wasn't around and I felt safe enough to just ask Dad a little bit about, what was my mom like?
Right.
And I don't know what was so hard about that for Dad, but he just never was really able to fully engage in that conversation. And that was just it was a quick, oh, she was really nice.
That's
it. Okay, that didn't really help me.
Nothing about her preferences or her character or what she loved to do or what they did together.
No, we weren't able to get into depth. And so that just reinforced that, hey, we're not a stepfamily, we're a first family, and this is not okay to talk about.
Right.
And anytime anything came up from history, especially in the midst of my stepmom, the tension was felt.
Yeah.
You could feel the tension. There was even some tension that existed between Nana and Papa and my dad and stepmom. And that, became a difficult thing as well.
Yeah.
But all of that ties back to my mom, because if she was still alive, then we wouldn't be in this situation.
Right.
Yeah.
And I wonder, for your dad, if you could guess why it was hard for him to engage in that. Do you think it was because of the presence of the new stepmom and her disapproval? Or do you think it was because of his own pain? Maybe it was just really hard for him to talk about it.
I would answer that with a yes. I would bet it was a bit of both. I don't know that there was any one thing.
Yeah.
It was probably a combination of multiple things, and some of it too, kind of my dad's personality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was very clear to you that the topic of mom was off limits.
Yeah. Our family was a sidestepping family.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
So you were very young when your mom passed away.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think was going on inside you as the memory of her kind of just was swept under the rug? There really wasn't memory of her kept alive. What kind of process were you going through?
Well, I think one thing that was really interesting was that because nobody talked to me really about her, I had to fill in the gaps on my own, which meant I created an ideal of her.
Okay.
I idealized her. I kind of put her up on a pedestal and thought she must have been perfect.
Right.
Like she must have been the best mom in the world. And I'm sure, I'm an adult now and all of that. I still kind of, have a little twinge of feeling that, even though I've learned a lot about her over the years. But I really leaned into idealizing her. And I think that got even more magnified when the tension grew because we couldn't talk about her. And it got more magnified when my stepmom struggled with her anger, and that would leak out on us kids. And so I would have those thoughts of, I bet my mom would never say something like that. I bet my mom would never treat me this way. I bet my mom, all over and over and over
Almost
again.
Fantasizing.
Yeah. And so here's a stepmom who I think wanted to love me well, but was struggling.
Right.
And then in my mind, she's now in competition with this ideal of a deceased mom that no one could ever live up to.
Yeah. So that's a whole nother facet of a loyalty bind there.
Big time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm sure it was confusing for you.
It was really confusing. I think one of the things that was really confusing, I don't think there was any malicious intent behind this, but one kind of strange thing that occurred, I don't even remember exactly when it was, but somewhere along the way, my dad and stepmom had my dad and biomom's original wedding bands melted down into like a gold nugget with the diamonds and everything. And it was placed on a necklace. And then my stepmom wore it.
Wow.
And I knew that. And so it was really weird having like this reminder right on the neck of this stepmom I was struggling with about my mom. And and I'm sure, people might be listening and be like, oh my gosh. Again, I don't think there was anything negative, no malicious intent. It was just a situation where I don't think my dad and stepmom really thought through the impact of what that might be.
Yeah, because there's so much symbolism to that. Here is the rings of the covenant they made to each other.
Yeah.
And you were a product of that covenant, and now they're melted down, and your stepmom is wearing it, and your stepmom refuses to even acknowledge that you have a bio mom.
So we're not allowed to talk about her, but there she is. Like there's the symbol. Yeah.
Wow.
And so that, that was tough. And it drove me to really want to understand. I wanted to know her more. And like I said a little bit ago, it's kind of a way to learn about her was a way to figure out about who I was. We're so excited to let you know about something brand new we've created just for you.
We've realized that with so many episodes available here on the show, it might feel a bit overwhelming to find the topics that matter most to you. That's why we've created a simple tool for you to receive a personalized playlist focused on your current struggle or your biggest challenge.
That's right. It's called the Blended Family Breakthrough Quiz. You'll answer just a few questions, and based on your responses, we'll email you a curated custom playlist of episodes that are specific to you.
This simple quiz will direct you to the most impactful episodes that pertain to you personally and keep you on track in your journey of discovery, learning, and growth. So, scroll all the way to the bottom of the show notes for this episode and click the link to take the Blended Family Breakthrough Quiz today.
Okay, let's get back to the discussion.
So there were a lot of challenges that you faced during those growing up years, but now you're an adult.
I am. Well, most of the time.
You don't always act like
chronologically,
it, but that's okay.
Chronologically, yeah.
And at this point in life, you've been a step-parent for over 20 years.
I have.
And you and I have been supporting step-family couples for years. You've done tons of research. You've built a ton of understanding around step-family dynamics. So with all that knowledge, now you're thinking back, what do you think was going on for your dad and stepmom? And why do you think they weren't able to allow you and your siblings to keep your mom's memory alive?
You know, I think my dad and my stepmom really wanted good things. Like they wanted a family. I mean, we all want that.
Right.
We all want a family, right? But we've got to remember that this was early 80s. This is like 1981, 1982. And they really didn't have the support at that time. So trying to figure out the skills and the unique dynamics and all of that to be effective, I don't think there was a whole lot of tools available for my dad and stepmom at that time.
They didn't know what they didn't know.
Exactly. And you know, we've talked about this several times on the show, but years ago, Ron Deal developed this idea about how to cook a stepfamily using what he calls this crock-pot approach, right? And he shared this in his very first edition of his book called The Smart Stepfamily. Now, that book didn't come out till 2002, right? So there were just so many unknowns, I think, back when I was a kid. And I think in the end, I think the desire to say there are no steps in this family and in their own way was probably what they felt was the right thing to do.
The intentions were probably good.
Yeah. These kids need to move forward, not stay stuck.
Right.
You know, all of these different thoughts. But what they didn't realize was not being able to process about our deceased mom actually was one of the things that was keeping us stuck.
Yeah.
And it was creating some of the tension in the home itself. Yeah. We were very much, you know, Ron has this whole cooking thing. We were very much a microwave blended family.
So microwave is kind of the instant family.
Absolutely.
We're just going to leave the past behind and start over.
Yeah. Throw it in the microwave and boom, it's warmed up and we all should just love each other and be okay.
Yeah.
I think, actually, now that I think about it, I think we were also very much a combination of the microwave and the pressure cooker.
The pressure cooker,
yeah.
yes.
And I like get that. Like my stepmom, my stepmom was an awesome cook. She cooked such great food.
She was a good cook.
And and she used to use the pressure cooker all the time. So this pressure cooker analogy, I get it. Yeah. And it was one of those old, it wasn't an Instant Pot. It's one of those old ones with the little weight on the top and it would, you know, blow off steam or whatever. And I remember being afraid of that thing because like if you knock it or you do something and it blows off, boy, that thing is going to blow.
Yeah.
And I think these pressuring messages of, you know, kind of one, don't talk about your history, and two, feel love for everyone in this family.
Yeah, here's the expectation.
There was a lot of pressure behind that.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think it was malicious or intentional. It just was.
Yeah.
And I think another thing that's really interesting about our family, we were dysfunctional behind closed doors. We struggled. We were also a church-going family. And that was hard for me along the way. And I think that was hard for my dad and stepmom as well, because in that environment, they might have felt like second-class citizens.
Right.
And that might not just have been true in the faith community. That might have been true in the general community.
Yeah.
Feeling like, well, somehow we failed, or somehow things aren't good enough, or somehow we're different, or whatever. They felt like second-class citizens. And I've come to learn that that's just simply not true.
Right.
And you and I are part of a faith community now, and we've learned that that's all about grace, and it's all about acceptance, and that we're not second-class citizens. And actually, we add to the value of the fabric of the society by learning to love well, even in the midst of blended family situations.
But I do think there's this compulsion, maybe even, to put on a perfect front.
Yeah.
And you've said it before. You had the white picket fence from the outside. Everything looked great.
Yep.
But what was going on behind closed doors was very dysfunctional.
Yeah.
And I want to kind of swing back around to what you just said about the pressure cooker, how, any minute it's going to blow and it's just building and building and building.
Yeah.
And you did blow as an adult.
Oh, yeah.
We've talked about that.
Yeah.
How these dynamics really set you up with some deep-seated wounds and pain that you brought into our marriage, and you blew eventually. I mean, you thank God you've gone through an amazing healing process.
Yeah, for sure.
But the pressure cooker built in you for years.
I think that's really true. And when I think about that analogy, I go all the way back to, in a lot of ways, our family kind of blew.
Yeah.
I left home at 16 years old.
Yeah.
And have had to try to make my way in the world since then. And none of us, to my recollection, kids that were living in that home made it to 18.
Yeah.
We all left in some form or another. My stepmom's, her bio kids went and lived with their dad for a while at a younger age. My sister left when she was 17. I left when I was 16.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, our family blew.
There was a lot of estrangement.
Yeah. And we had a lot of residue later in life. And it's been challenging.
Yeah.
So, we've been talking about this microwave and pressure cooker and crock pot and all of that. If you want to know more about that, if you're like, what in the world, or is this a cooking show or what?
Or if you just need a review.
Yeah,
we
exactly.
all need that sometimes.
Head back to episode 72 and we lay some of Ron's analogies out in that episode. And I think it'll really bring you some value.
The best strategy for healthy bonding is the crock pot.
Yeah.
No pressure. No Stepfamily,
right?
Just low and slow. So check that out.
Totally.
So let's switch gears here. Your parents were really, we talked about earlier, really doing this sidestepping thing. There are no steps.
Yeah.
What's one simple thing you think they might have done differently that could have made it a bit better for you?
I think Dad could have worked a little bit harder at just making a space for us to talk about my mom. Even if it meant we kind of had to do that apart from my stepmom.
Right.
Maybe take me for some one-on-one time or some opportunity to connect with me and let me ask questions and let me learn and kind of decompress and that kind of thing. I think that could have brought some of the pressure down.
Yeah.
And I think it would have been maybe kind of simple, right? He could have found little ways to free me up to just love my mom, even though she wasn't there.
Right. Or connect with her.
Yeah. I mean, but that's what I wanted to do. I mean, even today at this age, I still want to love my mom, even though she's not here. Her. Yeah. And by the way, all of this was very different for me than it was for my other siblings. Right. My older brother was 10 when mom passed away. My sister was 7 when she passed away. Boy, they had memories. They still have memories. And they needed a different way to process. They might have needed some external help, but they needed to have a safe space to be able to move forward. And I think it has impacted their whole life, and it's still to some ways impacted. Yeah,
they needed to be able to reminisce.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's funny about Dad is he's loving. He really is loving. But I think maybe he just was afraid. Maybe he didn't want to mess things up or something. And I wish that he would have been able to hold on to the concept that he didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be present.
Right.
I really needed him to be present in those kind of conversations.
Yeah, he didn't have to be a child psychologist.
Yeah.
He just needed to let you know it was safe to talk about whatever you needed to talk about.
Yeah. I think that there's this temptation in any family to sidestep. I think that's one simple thing to think about is how can I help my bio child simply process the loss of the relationship, whether it was from death or abandonment or divorce.
That's a loss of family identity.
Exactly. To just be able to process their feelings around that. They need a safe place to process their hurts and their hang-ups. Yep. This isn't a new concept. It's true for kids in first families as well, and not just kids in step families. I mean, you and I have 2 bio kids.
Right.
And Annika's been out of the house for several years. And you know what? Our kids need a safe place to process the hurts and the hang-ups and the challenges that they've had. And I know it's easier when you're in a first family, but blended family kids really need this.
Yeah, and that can be challenging for a step parent who maybe feels a bit fragile.
Absolutely.
When the other parents talked about, regardless of what the role that other parent plays in the child's life.
Yep.
It can feel a little bit threatening for step parents.
Or a lot of bit threatening.
Yeah, it can be tough.
Yeah. So I challenge anyone who's listening to consider how might you create that type of environment for them. And the safe space. And you know what? Don't get confused about this word safe. You know, you might be a really lighthearted, gentle, kind parent, but you just have a hard time with active listening and affirming a child when they're feeling down. Like I've struggled with that over the years as well. So if you're minimizing their pain or really trying to quickly redirect them to something that's a distraction, your conversational environment just became unsafe, right? Safety in conversation isn't just about somebody blowing their top. It's about, am I being heard? Do I feel known? And am I able to express what's really genuinely going on in my heart?
Yeah. Is it okay?
Yeah. And you know, my dad, he's just not that great at being able to talk through those things. He wants to quickly redirect it, or, you know, he'll say, even today, sometimes, I love you, Dad, if you hear this, but even today, sometimes he'll say some comment like, well, that's just so far in the past, you know, but things in the past, when they're a matter of the heart, become emotions of the present.
Right.
And we've got to be able to engage in that.
Yeah.
And when the environment becomes unsafe,
right,
then it gets interpreted as, I don't want to talk about the yucky stuff.
Right. I can't handle it.
And now, why would I bring it up again? Why would I try to keep talking to you about it if you're not making it safe for me to do that or reasonable for me to do that? Yeah.
And I think a lot of parents don't feel equipped to have these conversations. It's hard to see your child struggling and hurting and confused and trying to figure out things and bringing up stuff from the past that you really don't want to talk about.
Totally.
But every parent can learn.
Absolutely.
It's a skill that you can learn. It's called emotion coaching. We talk about it on the show all the time. And there's even a great book. It's an easy read called Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child by John Gottman. We'll put a link in the show notes to that.
Totally.
But it is something that every parent can learn to do, even when it's difficult and painful.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think every parent needs to learn these skills. And I want to just call up step parents to really take seriously learning these skills because kids have experienced loss.
Yeah.
And every step family journey began with a loss, every single one of them. And so we've got to be able to bring that loss up to the surface so that it can dissipate and we can work through it rather than staying stuck in it. And when we sidestep, for many families, and again, I know this is a really controversial subject because some people are just going to be really mad at what we're sharing here, and that's okay. I respect that, and I get that.
But in this situation, the dynamics have been broken.
Yeah.
And we're rebuilding.
Yes.
And it's okay to rebuild.
Absolutely. It's important to rebuild.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I just want to encourage, we're working with a couple right now where both of them have lost their former spouses, and they've been blending for a number of years. And recently we had a conversation with them where they shared how they're making it safe. They're both step parents.
Yeah.
They're both trying to relate to kids who have lost a parent, and they're really working hard at simply not being threatened.
Yeah.
They're saying some things like, hey, you know what? I bet your dad would have been really proud of you for that. Or, man, I bet your mom would have loved to be here.
That's a powerful message to send to a stepchild. And it just lets them know that you care about their loss.
Yeah.
And it also offers them that safe space that it's okay to talk about that.
Yeah.
It's not a competition.
Right.
And the thing about love is it's not finite.
Yes.
There's enough to go around for everyone. We don't have to compete for a child's love.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree with that. And, you know, so step parents, this is hard. This is hard. And so I just want to reiterate, like Kim just said, do your best to not be threatened by that other parent in your stepchild's life, whether they're living or whether they're not, because it's not a competition. And the truth is that child is a part of that parent. And when you are able to honor that, then you're actually honoring the child.
Absolutely.
And so find ways to honor that relationship, even when it's hard. And that is going to help you build your own relationship with your stepchild.
Yeah, even if it's in little ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you're struggling with a lot of this, Ron Deal has some really practical ways for you to go about this. We just chatted with Ron last week on the show, and he talked about his newest book. And you know what? He's got plenty more books in the Smart Stepfamily series, like the Smart Stepfamily, the Smart Stepmom, the Smart Stepdad.
Yeah.
They all have great ways for you to understand more of these kind of dynamics and really work to, we're saying it's kind of a new thing for us, but we're saying embrace the step in your stepfamily, right? Don't try to get rid of the step, but embrace the step in your stepfamily. Free up that tension for the kids and in the relationships, and make it okay, make it safe to talk about real, vulnerable, genuine things, even when it's hard. It's the hardest conversations that often bring people together.
Yeah.
And I think it's true in any relationship. You and I have worked hard at having hard conversations, and it's drawn us closer as a couple. And you know what? A few years back, I had the opportunity to go one-on-one with Dad, and we had, I don't know, a 3 or 4 hour conversation hanging out in a restaurant somewhere where we just finally really unpacked some of the things from our history. You know, we haven't talked about this part of my story, but my stepmom also passed away almost 13 years ago, I think. So now Dad has survived 2 spouses, and he's remarried again, and she has her own adult kids, and
more
so
stepkids.
Yeah, we've built more complexity into our blended family. But you know what? Dad's been through some stuff too.
Yeah,
Dad's had some loss as well, and so we sat there and we had this kind of awkward, kind of hard conversation, and it set the stage for something brand new in our relationship. And because we did that, we now have more opportunity to connect, more opportunity to talk. And it's getting better.
Yeah. And you're learning a little bit more about who your mom was, which is amazing for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know. This is a different episode. It's a little bit,
off the cuff,
very much off the cuff. We would actually love to hear your feedback. You know, you can go to our share page, mikeandkimcoaching.com/share. You can send us an email. You can find that on the website. We'd kind of love to hear from a few of you of what was this episode like for you, and just give us some feedback on that. But I hope it brought you value. I hope it brought you hope. I hope it challenged you. And if my story can bring hope to even just one couple, I'm happy for it to do that.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it has, honey. And thanks for letting me interview you.
Yeah, good job.
Thanks for sharing.
Good job. I think you have a future in the media.
I don't know about that.
Well, again, hopefully that brought you value. And I think that's going to make this episode a wrap.
Until next time.